welcome back to Standing Strong for Marriages. We're very happy to have you. Today we're going to be looking at a site that you may not have heard of. It goes by the name of Dalrock. He's a blogger. I'll move my little screen out of the way and you can see he says thoughts from a happily married father on a post-feminist world. So, hey, before I kick things off, I usually try to do a year in review best sermons or videos that promote marriage and family, things to see marriage is restored. I need some nominees from you guys and ladies. So please drop it, in the comments. Let me know what you think would be something worthwhile. I will check it out. I'll try to do a top 5 for this year. I was very happy with last year's. So let's jump into this thing from Dalrock. So he actually says a couple interesting things right there. One, he's happily married. He's a father. And he calls it a post-feminist world. Well, one thing that I've noticed really looking at some Facebook groups, some comments, some things from men versus things from women is, there's a lot of guys that say, well, feminism is a big problem. How many times do you hear women making the same assessment? I think it's very interesting. There seems to be some disconnect on that level as far as how people are seeing this. Now, Dalrock does claim to be a Christian from Texas, which is like a Bible Belt type of thing, Dallas-Fort Worth area. So I started here at the home screen. You can see home, about, the death of courtship, feminist territory marking, finding a spouse, game, never married, new morality, romantic love, satire, ugly feminist, wake-up call, weak men screwing feminism up, and wife worship. So Christianity is in this weird spot. He claims to be a Christian, and one thing I like about this is that it definitely jumps into stuff that we're not going to see at church. We'll start with the about, and I just basically hit the top comment and just going to give you guys a survey, a flavor of what he writes on, what they're talking about here. Let's start with the about. It's very brief. It's very concise. Concision. Is that going to be the word of the day? About, I'm a happily married man living with my sexy wife and our 2 wonderful children in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I'm very interested in how the post-feminist world impacts myself and my family. And I'm using this blog to explore these kinds of issues. So it's pretty niche. I hope to enjoy this blog and most of all take a few minutes to comment on any entries which interest you. Feel free to either agree or disagree, although I find that I learn the most from those who disagree with me. So fire away. No problem there. Let's go to this next one. So there's one about chivalry. He says, why reject chivalry? So the first one we'll look at, call me unchivalrous. We'll scroll down, what I am rejecting by rejecting chivalry. So in both Christianity and chivalry, we are redeemed by sanctifying love. However, where Christianity teaches that Christ's agape love and sacrifice/suffering is what saves and sanctifies us, chivalry teaches us that it's romantic love, or eros in the Greek, especially the romantic love of a woman, is what saves and sanctifies us. In Christianity, Christ suffered undeservingly on the cross to sanctify us. In chivalry, sanctification is achieved by the man suffering undeservedly at the whims of the woman. So, have you heard anybody say stuff like that before? I really haven't. So, where Christianity teaches that marriage makes sex and sexual desire moral, chivalry originally taught that the only pure expression of sexual passion occurred within adultery, and you can follow the link if you want to find out why he could say that or why he is saying that. Later, this was further twisted to a modern Christian assertion that romantic love sanctifies married sex, which means that, there's no sex, all that stuff in 1 Corinthians 7 about, men and women owing sex to their partner, that being part of the whole marriage deal. It got put on its head kind of, and now it's like, well, there's no sex unless everyone feels romantically up for it, and that's something we hear all the time. I mean, all the time I heard someone post like that. They're saying, well, women will deny sex unless they feel up for the case. And she was asking, so men, do you do the same thing? Do you basically say, if you're not going to give me sex, then I'm not going to give you any verbal affection, any, whatever, the kind of romantic stuff that she wants, the emotional stuff that she wants. And I thought, man, is that a recipe for disaster? I mean, it's it's so passive aggressive. And if both people jump on board with that, then it's not long until you're living in a total nightmarish type of relationship. So I would say definitely avoid and watch out for that. But, I saw someone post that on a secular marriage, group for marriage support or whatever. Well, anyway, he says that if you first install this whole thing, that there needs to be romantic love or romance involved before sex can take place, and that in turn creates the logical case for no-fault divorce, which we saw, happen in many, many places where it just, you don't love them anymore. And so that's not only the grounds for sex, it's the grounds for the continuation of the entire relationship. So where Christianity teaches that wives are to submit to their own husbands in fear and reverence, chivalry originally taught that men to submit to other men's wives in fear and reverence. Later, this was modified to teaching men to submit to their own wives in fear and reverence, aka what is often tossed around as a term in church, servant leadership. I remember, my father-in-law or former father-in-law, whatever you want to say, he made sure that I was well aware that this was the essence of the Christian husbanding was, so the servant leader. Anyway, I nailed the pop quiz, but anyways, I guess marriage is a little more than passing a knowledge test from your father-in-law. Where Christianity commends raw sexual passion between a husband and a wife, and even uses animal imagery to describe how this should look, chivalry teaches that romantic love is superior to the Bible's sexual passion because it's focused on emotion. Where Christianity teaches that sex outside of marriage is sinful and shameful, chivalry teaches that it is more noble than married sex so long as it is sanctified by romantic love. Chivalry also teaches that women's sexual desires are inherently moral and that a woman's sexual desire for a man is proof of the man's virtue and that a good man will not slut shame. So we get into all this stuff. Like I said, I'm just going to give you a flavor of it. But, this is really interesting. Now, like I said, or like he said, he's a Christian. So they look at Timothy 2:14, which says, Adam was not the one deceived. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. Paul gives this as one reason why he does not permit women to, quote, teach or have authority over man. So this is in the context of an article that's talking about the Southern Baptist Convention, basically turning back from its historical stance on having men do the preaching. So now this is in bold. Historically, this has usually been taken to mean that women are more gullible or deceivable than men and therefore less fit for the doctrinal oversight of the church. This may be true. See question 29, whatever question 29 is. However, we are attracted to another understanding of Paul's argument. We think that Satan's main target was not Eve's particular gullibility, if she had one, but rather Adam's headship as the one ordained by God to be responsible for the life of the garden. So one thing that is very, very controversial, very controversial, even among Christians, is, should men lead? Do men have a certain authority in the relationship as God called men to certain responsibilities that women have not been called to? Is this a slight on women? Are they made to be lesser beings under Christianity? And essentially, you could even say, is Christianity fundamentally abusive towards women? Does it, put them in some lower place? Which would ultimately even go as far as to say, is God an abusive sexist? Well, that's all kind of underlaying, and they don't talk about that at any church I've ever been to, right? So again, like I say, I like these niche people who are doing these. Like we just covered one. I highlighted a lot of work that one woman was doing on polygamy. I think she had her husband basically come home to her one day and announce, you know what, God has told me that I'm to take a second wife. So I'm not divorcing you. He was just going to say, I'm taking a second wife, like David or like Solomon or whoever. And she did a lot of work to put together something very niche in that area. Well, this is very niche on this area from this man on feminism. So that's why we're looking at it. The weakened signal hits home. This is from September 2019. Now, like I said, almost all the stuff that you're going to see is coming from very recent posts. And one thing I didn't mention before is he's stopped writing. I don't know how long this information is going to be available. He said that he was going to leave it up for some undisclosed amount of time. So, you might want to jump in on it or check it out. Or I guess you can't really download these pages. I guess you could export them as PDFs if you really wanted to make a library or whatever. But there's, 10 years that he's been doing this. So we have a quote here from Sheryl Sandberg, which Sheryl Sandberg, you'll get an idea of who she is from her quote. When looking for a life partner, my advice to women is to date all of them. The bad boys, the cool boys, the commitment-phobic boys, the crazy boys, but do not marry them. The things that make the bad boy sexy do not make them good husbands. So it goes on to say, a new study is making the rounds that found a mismatch between the imaginary men unmarried women are planning on marrying and the real-life unmarried men available to these women. I'll throw up a little thing I saw someone I know post on their Facebook page about the dating pool in church. This mismatch between fantasy and reality is predictably generating outrage that weak men are screwing feminism up. From the New York Post, broke men are hurting American women's marriage prospects. It goes on to say, from the Post, researchers created profiles of potential husbands based on real husbands as logged in American Christianity survey data. They then compared these hypothetical spouses with actual unmarried men. They found that a woman's made-up hubby makes 58% more money than the current lineup of eligible bachelors. The study reveals large deficits in the supply of potential male spouses. It says many young men today have little to bring to the marriage bargain, especially as young women's educational levels, on average, now exceed their male suitors. So they had a little graph they threw in, percent of U.S. men never married by age, 2003 in the, yellow, 2017 in the blue. This is just all white men, U.S. Census current population survey. So basically, again, 2017 is in the blue, and basically just more men are not marrying. Okay, so and that's pretty much, they break it down even by generation: Gen Z, Gen Y, Gen X, the Boomers. I don't see a single age bracket. These are in 2-year segments. I don't, or 2 to 3, 2 years, and I don't see a single one where, yeah, men are marrying more often today. This next one, the Heritage Foundation isn't serious yet, but one day they might be. There was basically a video put out that, the biggest issue in America is marriage, which was pretty interesting. There is, I did a couple things on marriage, family, and money, and one thing that's very interesting is basically the economic impact. So as you guys know, I do another channel on finance, and if you want to predict a country's GDP, one of the easiest ways you can do it is predict the number of people that there's going to be actively participating in the workforce, and you multiply that by basically the productivity level that they have. That's a very, very simple way. So, there you go. Well, if you have less marriage, I've done other videos that basically if you want to inspire your people to have children, hands down, the best way to do it is to have more marriage. And most kids or more children will come out of all the other different relationship factors, say like cohabitation or just dating or whatever. If you want to maximize the output of children, and we know many developed countries are having a difficult time reproducing their population. They're having to, bring in many immigrants and stuff like this. This is true for Canada. This is true for the United States, Europe, Germany. I mean, almost all the developed, European, Anglo, whatever countries, they just can't. So they've come up with all these crazy ways to incentivize their people to have children, including paying them anywhere from like $150 to like $500. So I'll leave a little tab for that, and you can check out that research because that's very interesting. So this article kind of concludes, still, the real effects of our rejecting marriage as a family model are piling up, and they risk limiting the resources our elites have to play with. While they aren't serious yet, one day a significant proportion of our elites will likely start to become so. So anyways, interesting. So he's saying that they're not really serious about protecting marriage yet, but maybe one day they will see that it's needed, economically needed. They talk about what are fathers for. Several commentators have noted the troubling image featured at a National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse, fatherhood.gov. I guess this is the picture of what a father is. I mean, I don't know. So he says, moreover, it isn't just feminists who have waged war on fathers. If anything, traditional conservatives are even more hostile to fathers than feminists are. So he's not even really saying that feminists are like public enemy number one. He goes to task with traditional conservatives as well. Just like feminists, the My Lord Mary Lee crowd can't stand the thought of fathers in charge. And so again, but making this all the more difficult, we are in denial regarding our war against fathers. The official party line is some version of 1, fathers are better now than they were in the past, and 2, fathers are absent for some entirely mysterious reason. I think I say this often. If you have never joined a Facebook group on like father custody, father's rights, parental alienation, go read what those people have to say. It's very interesting what they have to say. When we ask the NRFC to teach the importance of fathers, something we as a society vehemently disagree with, we are creating a no-win situation for them. They dare not speak the truth, and yet they need to be seen encouraging fatherhood, or they won't be able to justify their funding. So it isn't surprising that the NRFC would lead with an image of fathers as comic relief. Who doesn't love laughter? And the image of fathers as clowns is one sure to please both feminists and chivalrous. So there you go. You can check out, the government trying to stand up for fathers. And I guess, you can agree or disagree about the predicament they're in. Do we as a society actually hate fathers? The idea of men in charge? Have we really gone full stop on letting the government basically, take money from fathers and distribute them to single mothers and basically get the dad out of the house altogether, barring the money, of course? Is that where we are? I mean, there's people, that's what they're saying. Should we fine-tune our replacement of marriage? WorkingMother.com has a post up about the question of whether men should be able to legally opt out of fatherhood. A woman said the idea came from a friend, a woman who had a child out of a friends with benefits situation with a man. Although he didn't want the baby from the beginning and didn't help during the first couple of years, he recently decided that he wants to have access to the child and start to build a relationship now that he is older to prevent such a thing from happening to other women who had accidental pregnancies. The friend proposed the following solution. Before the baby is 1 month old, a man who wants to opt out of fatherhood would sign a document that states he has no desire to be part of the child's life in any way, will not ever be able to seek any type of access, and will not pay money. Now, having men sign the document, it would save the mom and child any, quote, significant stress and heartache. Not surprisingly, this proposal did not go over well with the single mother crowd. I would predict it would have fared equally bad with the My Lord Mary Lee crowd. See, I don't even know who this woman is. But anyways, it kind of ends up like this. Prior to the child support model, marriage was the way both men and women resolved the question of involvement by and support from the father. In the past, marriage granted men fatherhood rights they otherwise could not expect to receive. It also granted women the right to support from the father. This way of viewing marriage is absolutely foreign to us now, as marriage is now about the moral primacy of romantic love. So again, we're back to this romantic love as the key piece. Now, this is also very interesting. For want of a lot of good employers. This is an article about guys who have never worked a day in their life, starting with Dana, who's 32, has never worked a day in his life. Begin guest post by Dana Hitchens. Hello, Dalrock readers. My name is Dana Hitchens, and despite recently turning 32, I've never held a job. As you can imagine, when I tell working people this, I'm constantly told that the problem is some combination of three things. One, I haven't really been seriously looking for work, or two, my expectations are too high, i.e. I'm too picky, or three, I haven't made myself attractive to prospective employers. But none of these are true. I mean, this person basically goes on to mention that though they're only 32 years old, that they have, a lot of debt of gratitude to other folks like Wendell Griffin. Wendell is 55 and has never worked a day in his life. Another mentor that Dana hopes to emulate is Randy Hale. Randy just turned 40 and has never had a job yet. Randy has dedicated his life to inspiring others to be like him. Randy has been writing books on being unemployed since he was in his early 30s. And his expertise in this area really shows. As Randy explains, the secret to a great career is having a truly excellent unemployed life. Now look, I just talked about the economic ramifications. I just did a video, or previously I've covered Dr. Helen Smith's work. It's basically about her analysis on men giving up on the American dream, on careers, on women and dating, and going to basically work very safe jobs, working as little as possible, having a life of leisure. And, this is going to be a problem for the political elites, if you want to call them that, if you believe in such things, which a lot of people do, especially in the last couple of years. It's come up, it's a term that I bet has seen a huge increase in its usage. But, basically, people who work or don't affect the tax income for economies. They contribute to the GDP or they don't. Definitely if, these guys have children or, on the hook or whatever, if they're supporting children following divorces, if they are committed to a life of not working, it has impacts for a lot of people. And here you have this whole article, it ends with a guy from Harvard Business School, degree from Harvard Business School, Alistair Rowe, age 30, hasn't worked yet by age 30. And so, he's saying that, this is maybe God is preparing for him the perfect job, but it just hasn't happened in God's perfect timing. Well, I don't know if I'm going to get to it, but there's a similar thing I think we're going to look at where a woman uses the same idea about God's perfect timing for her. She held off getting married until she was 50. And she's a Christian woman, and she is, we'll see her in a second. But before I move on, this is weird, right? Guys just hanging around till they're 40, till they're 47, till they're 55, never having a job, never having any kind of work history at all. So, like I said, stuff that doesn't get covered in mainstream media. So this is Dalrock's Law of Feminism. And I guess he gives us an example or a definition of feminism, which I think is kind of hard to define at times. Feminism is the assertion that men are evil and naturally want to harm women, followed by pleas to men to solve all of women's problems. So that's what he says is feminism. That's his definition for feminism. Not a very shining thing. Probably wouldn't get taught in, like women's lib classes or whatever, but that's what he thinks. And like I said, you don't have to agree with this guy, but if we want to have a good sense of where we are, if we're going to get serious about the legitimacy that marriage has for a culture, the benefits that it has, the wisdom of God. If you're a Christian, Bible believing person, you need to be a little bit fluent, or I think that we would all benefit from being a little bit fluent about the two sides. So, like I said in the very beginning of the video, I read a lot of posts on a lot of different marriage and kind of dating type stuff, Christian and secular. Rarely ever hear women complaining or saying that, feminism is a big part of the problem of the letdown in their marriages, of their upset with their husbands, of the reason behind their divorces, of the reasons why they can't marry, why maybe the dating pool, like guys, are so disappointing. I never hear women say that. I honestly never hear women post that. Yeah, I hear guys post it all the time, especially guys with divorce court interactions, with child custody interactions, with guys who say that they're not going to marry. I hear guys say it a lot. So we have to somehow at least try to figure out, connect the dots and say, well, what's going on here? This summer, the Melinda Gates, obviously Bill and Melinda Gates, launched a campaign called Equality Can't Wait. The goal was to use humor to solve the problem of inequality in STEM, so this is science, technology, engineering, and math careers. And it says the Gates campaign has a chance of helping to speed up change, not least because it puts another nail in the coffin of a worn out stereotype that women aren't funny, and that bringing up inequality somehow shows them up as humorless. The series is even more dismal than I would have imagined. Here's but one example of the campaign: 5 minutes of male and female feminist scolding dressed up as a comedy routine. And so this one, I guess, got taken down or something, but you can watch this one here. Equal mics is what they call it. Equality can't wait. Equality can't wait. Anyways, he critiques that. There's this other one. They're too traditional to submit to their husbands. Submitting to the Lord sometimes involves drawing clear boundaries and enacting consequences when a husband sins. That's from Mary Cassian. And so we'll see this, those boundaries in marriage books. I haven't covered them, but I've read them by Cloud and, oh man, what's that guy's name? Henry Cloud. I'll put it up. But anyways, huge sellers. I mean, people basically gobble that up. Boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. Anyways, where this basically goes is what you need to do if you're a woman. You need to surrender your pride of becoming a divorcee. You need to get over that. Go ahead, get over that. It's just your pride of having to go through the rest of your life that your marriage failed. You're part of a failed marriage, and that you need to repent of your idolatry. Your idol being your marriage, and actually. What they would say is, repent and come back to God. Repenting and coming back to God would be asking yourself these 4 difficult questions. Does the thought of your marriage ending bother you more than the thought of living with this sin forever? So it's some sin on your husband's part. I think they're talking about pornography or who knows what, but it doesn't really matter what the sin is. The idea is that women are supposed to either enact divorce or threaten divorce or something in order to, help their husbands. They end up landing on the First Corinthians 5. Verse where, cast out the immoral brother, turn him over to Satan, help him hit rock bottom, right? All that stuff, exclude him from the community so that he can, fully be turned over to Satan and repent and be saved. It's the same idea that they're using here in order to encourage women to end their marriages. Number 2, are you more horrified by the idea of everybody knowing you failed at your marriage than you are of the idea of there being a secret sin in your marriage that no one knows about but you or your husband? So, again, who knows? That could be, I guess, any sin, too much TV, too much video games, being lazy, I don't know, it could be anything. So, number 3, do you believe God would prefer you to be abused than divorced? So, actually, quite often. I mean, I see people post that stuff all the time. Well, God is for my divorce. He, set me free of all the vows I made. And maybe people would even go as far as to say, well, now, they're free to remarry even because abuse somehow overrides the Matthew 5 verses, the Matthew 19 verses. So it's very interesting, how these arguments are made. Number 4, what's more important to you, obedience to God or the approval of Christians? So basically, they know that Christians are not going to approve of divorces. We've talked about that a lot. Most Christians, Bible-believing Christians, because they would say, for example, that vows are very important to keep. Let our yes be yes, let our no be no. That 1 Corinthians 7 says that a husband should not divorce his wife, a wife should not leave her husband. Certainly they should not remarry if they do such things. But it does make it clear that those should not be occurring among Christians. In that same vein, someone shared with me this passage from Ezekiel 16:38 that I thought was very eye-opening, something that I had not heard, and it reads, "And I will judge you," this is God speaking to the people of Israel. It says, "And I will judge you as a woman who breaks wedlock, or sheds blood or judge. So that's very interesting. That breaking a marriage up is the same as becoming so violent with someone that you shed blood. And I will bring blood upon you in fury and jealousy. Now, if this is how God really is, if this is how he speaks, you can look it up. But if this is how he sees things, I think it's appropriate to warn people. Not. The other verse that comes to mind is the one about taking the log out of one's own eye before trying to remove the speck in the brother's eye. So Romans 2 also, anytime that we judge people, we're guilty of the same thing. So we have to be very, very careful not to go off the deep end with this one verse from 1 Corinthians 5 and disregard all these other verses. Because if people destroy their families, I think there's very, very significant and serious warnings of how God will deal with those people. So just wanted to throw that out there. I think it's important. There's other verses that, God's name is defamed among non-believers because of how Christians act. We do hear about the ones about divorce being violence from Malachi. So, but I guess they sidestep all those verses by basically saying that what you need to do is you need to make strong, clear biblical boundaries. And, she writes a book on boundaries. I'll put her, if I can find her, I'll put her work up. So she says, you need to make strong, clear biblical boundaries, and that she wrote a book on biblical boundaries. And so basically what needs to happen is, we'll just skip to the end. This is probably an area I struggle most in. It doesn't feel loving to say, if you do X, I will have to ask you to leave the house for 90 days. It feels mean. The thing is, I can see it easily with my children. I totally get that setting strong boundaries with them and enforcing painful consequences when they disobey is a loving way to set them up for success in life. I can understand that as a result of my delight in them, I will faithfully discipline and correct. But my husband is not my child. My friends, my parents, extended family members are not the same as my children. Sometimes it doesn't feel like I have a right to discipline those people. But then I read passages like 1 Corinthians 5. Wow, she says. Sisters, God has commanded us to establish and enforce boundaries around morality with all believers. Why? As an act of love. Verse 5 shows us that disciplining such violations will basically force the person to hit rock bottom, which is the most likely way to see him restored. So basically what it's saying is divorce isn't sinful. Divorce isn't wrong. Divorce isn't a violation of vows. It's not a betrayal of God. It will bring, they're going to say it's not going to bring any condemnation or any punishment from God, possibly eternal punishment if you talk about the unwillingness to forgive, like in the Lord's Prayer, and other passages like the unmerciful servant that I've brought up in the past. But basically, it's none of that. They're saying this is actually not sin at all. Divorce is not sinful at all. It's actually, it's love, and how are we going to deal with that? Is that controlling? Or is it love? Well, you can see this is what some people are arguing. And I think it's interesting to read these things because I think you'll notice that people hint around at this stuff in conversations. They won't be as bold as to outright write it like these authors will. I mean, they're forced to put something down on paper if they're going to sell books, and ultimately they have to make some conclusions, which usually people in conversation are not willing to go all the way to the logical end. But these writers, like I said, they're kind of forced to. Worth the wait. This is from Wendy Griffin. Wendy Griffin was the author of You Are a Prize to Be Won. Basically a woman who claims that she decided to stay single until she was in her 50s. So it says in the video below, she holds her longtime fame that God's plan for her was to remain unmarried until her mid-50s and that other women should follow her lead and never settle. This reinforces the fact that conservative Christian feminism outdoes even secular feminism, and that secular feminist women are warning marriage delaying women to settle in their 30s when settling is good. So what he says is still, I think, most of the women reading her book understood how long Wendy actually ended up waiting. They would be horrified. As pleased as Wendy no doubt is to finally marry, and as pleased as I am for her, I don't think many young women would be comforted in their season of singleness to hear that they will marry a 59-year-old man when they are 54. I don't know. Ladies, would you take that advice from women like Wendy? And is Christian feminism a more extreme version, I guess, of feminism as compared to secular feminism? There's a little blurb here. What is blue pill? Blue pill, red pill is something, we'll see it defined here. red pill is a reactionary negative movement. And he says, this is true. The difficulty with defining red pill begins with defining what it is reacting against. And so they talk about it begins within it's like a men's movement. We talked about it some before. He has obviously talked to us about chivalry in the past. And so they go on, this is like, I'm not going to read all this to you guys, but I just want you to get an idea. Christianity, the real deal, led to chivalry or courtly love, the game of love, a parody of Christianity, which led to chivalry and courtly love adopted as Christianity. It either leads to feminism as a midpoint, which ultimately leads to game, or directly to game. So game would basically be, you guys should be kind of familiar with it, but basically doing things that play on women's emotions in order to give them the sense that you are at some level above them, which plays into their hypergamy and into their ideas of romance and sexual attainment, that they've kind of settled down or landed the guy that is kind of at the top of their potential. And once they do that, then they're very open to giving him sexual access to her body. And so that is like the whole thing that men should basically become very good at. It has nothing to do with marriage, has really nothing to do with a commitment. It's simply playing the field and playing it well. So, that's maybe where we get to, people that write about the red pill and about the manosphere and all this other stuff. They talk a lot about game, about how to, understand women's sexual goals, strategies, and how to basically win. I don't know win exactly, but maybe if they're competing against other men, then win in that sense. So a lot of anti-marriage stuff coming out of there. Songs of praise. DC Larson, the American thinker, notes the creator of the Gillette ads. This was from kind of like the Super Bowl. This was like 2018 ad. The Gillette ad, basically like men shaming, and as a way to sell razors, because they believe that, well, first of all, they got a kind of like a women's marketing ad agency to come up with the idea. They suppose that women do most of the shopping, so if they wanted to increase the sales of razors for men, that they should appeal to women. They could do that in one of two ways. One, by basically humiliating men, and the other way was to basically show women as great and flatter them as much as possible. So that's some of the stuff that you'll see, all different kinds of, commercials that I've never even seen, but having to do with, women's self-esteem coming through. So it descends on some of the stuff that we'll see in like marketing strategies and all kinds of stuff that we receive as viewers, as people, as Christians. And like he said in the beginning, he's a married man. He has a sexy wife. He has 2 kids, and he writes in general in order to be able to understand how all of this stuff that seems very strange, off the beaten path, what are all these, guys not marrying, all this stuff on feminism, post-feminism, Christian feminism, secular feminism, staying single, not marrying for men, for women trying to stay single until they're in their 30s, till they're in their 50s, all this stuff he's trying to say, how is this affecting me, my family, and my marriage? Well, I don't know, but I thought it was interesting, so there you guys go.